simple way of illustrating that there are two sides to every story. So that's what Mr. Chesnoff and I feel a little awkward calling him Mr. Chesnoff because I call him David or Ches or Hey You usually. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you what we think the evidence will show, and more importantly, what we think the evidence will not show. Because the lack of evidence is evidence also.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Today we're dealing with day 4 in the DURST trial, which deals with effectively the defense's opening statement after the marathon 3-day opening from the prosecution. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through about the first 10 minutes of the opening statement, and then I'm going to...
He was naked in his cell on a cold metal bunk when in the middle of the night he is taken out by 2 police officers from LA and Mr. Lewin. Now Mr. Lewin may have had a legal right to do that, but that doesn't mean you cannot consider that the evidence would show that you had an elderly person who had just been arrested, he's awakened in the middle of the night, and he's taken into an interrogation room.
So to start off with the defense, we're going to offer 2 faces to the opening statement. Basically Dick DeGuerin, right? And then his co-counsel would sort of take the baton from him as well. Now this is quite an effective way of almost psychologically kind of outnumbering the argument of the prosecution by having more than one person kind of say something that supports, complements, supplements what the other one is saying. So it's almost like you hear 2 people saying kind of the same thing or dealing with the same angle. It just feels a little bit stronger than one person dealing with it. So that was an interesting opening strategy by the defense. The other aspect that you will notice with the defense is the sort of levity that's involved. There's quite a lot of chuckling, quite a lot of personalizing everything, quite a lot of informal reaching out to the jury, quite a lot of little things that are done to establish rapport with the jury. Now, taken in real time and taken at the moment, all these little gestures seem silly, seem even unprofessional, seem irrelevant. But bear in mind, this trial is going to go on for months. The people in this room are going to get to know each other and see each other and get sick of each other day in and day out. And at some point, the jury are going to feel more comfortable seeing a particular face and hearing a particular voice, not necessarily based on the information coming from these people, but based on the rapport that is developed. You know, so and this is the weird thing with jury trials, is the one person going to be a friendlier persona, someone that brings a little bit of entertainment and a bit of fun, I guess may even be the word, within the context of the trial narrative, compared to the other one who is dry and severe and serious. And that is unfortunately the human element that creeps into these cases. And so right from the word go, DeGuerin sort of makes a joke where the judge says, "Are you ready?" And he sort of kind of sniggers and he says, "I've been ready for a long time." And the whole court laughs. And that is a great start for him, because it's sort of a feeling that I think everyone has. The jury feels like, they've been ready for a long time. They are waiting. And kind of the thing that is that the defense are kind of knocking on the psychological door to, they're sort of saying, they're kind of acknowledging the thing that everyone is feeling beyond the court case itself, which is, wow, this is taking a lot of time. This is taking a lot of my time. This is taking a lot of attention. This is kind of an inconvenience in a way to what I would be normally doing. And it's a little bit of like the devil sitting on your shoulders saying, yeah, I understand how you're feeling. I understand that you would rather be somewhere else doing something else, right? But in strictly speaking, in the confines, in the context of this case, this is a criminal murder trial. And at what point do you say, let me put aside my things, my paraphernalia, and let me focus on this, and let us deal with justice? When are we going to deal with justice? After 20 years, after 40 years? When are we going to pay attention to this particular case? And so it's quite sneaky what is happening here. This whole thing of, yes, it's it's a bummer that we've got to sit here all day, and it's a bummer that we've had to sit through 3 days of the prosecution, blah blah blah. Well, now it's my turn, and I'm not going to take up so much of your time, etc., etc. He's trying to get on to the side of the jury. That's who sort of matters to the defense, is kind of making friends and seeming to be on the same page as the jury, but in certain areas. And so at about the 1 minute mark in the opening from the defense, you have DeGuerin approach the stand or the podium, and basically assumes the position. And it's now his turn to talk, and he kind of makes bear in mind, this is definitely rehearsed. This is definitely premeditated. This opening has been thought about by the whole team. And so what he does is he approaches that sort of wooden lectern, and he sighs, and he sort of says, kind of disparagingly, where to start. And he sort of looks down as he talks about 3 days. And what he's doing is already making a dig at the prosecution. He's emphasizing the amount of time that the prosecution has sort of wasted or put people through, or kind of tortured the jury with, all of this time droning on, blah blah blah. And he's sort of humanizing this aspect, which is, we all sitting in court, and wow, the prosecution haven't been very sympathetic to you guys, the jury, right? But don't worry, we the good guys, we care about you, and we care about our client. And so it's already, all of it is designed to bring about basically one emotion, which is sympathy. So I'm going to be sympathetic towards you, and you're going to be sympathetic towards me, and you're going to be sympathetic towards my client, and you're going to be sympathetic towards this distasteful idea that is being accused of murder. And and that's kind of the way that the whole thing is framed. What's also interesting, and this is at about 75 seconds into the opening, DeGuerin talks about he wasn't expecting this. And it's something that I mentioned in a previous episode, just that this is kind of a chess game, and you want to sort of outwit and outfox your opposition in terms of the legal chess game that's kind of going on. And what DeGuerin kind of says here is, and he laughs, he says, well, I wasn't expecting this, meaning he wasn't expecting this sort of assault from the prosecution, this big opening, this big strong opening. And so he kind of says, well, let's start over. Let me introduce my team. And what he's doing here is he's personalizing everyone. He's sort of introducing all the people in the room so that they are people with names and relationships, so that the jury forms kind of unspoken bonds with the other people. He even introduces his wife and I think his grandchildren, and they even gives their ages. And none of this is really relevant, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to ingratiate himself with the jury. He's trying to be almost like the neighbor or the beaming grandfather, the sort of well-to-do, well-intentioned, benign grandfather. He's sort of trying to have that impression. He's trying to introduce his co-counsel informally as pals, and he sort of says something to the effect that he doesn't call a particular person Mr. this or whoever. Instead he says, hey you. And he's trying to share the relationships he has with these people, with the jury, and so that the jury can kind of reach out and have the same sense of relationship with them. Because bear in mind, at the end of the day, when the jury have got to execute a verdict, when they've got to pronounce their verdict, that's the bottom line to this trial. They've got to make a decision between whose side are they on. So it's very dualistic. And the more relationships have been set up, the harder it's going to be to say, okay, well, I don't want to disappoint this guy, but I'm going to have to blah, 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 whatever it is. So that's what he's doing. He's trying to make it hard to make a rational decision. In other words, he's trying to bring emotions into the game. So it's quite clever. At about the 3-minute mark, he talks about Texas and California. Now, bear in mind, he is a Texan, Daguerreian, and he is saying that Martha, I think where he's from, is closer to LA than it is to Houston. So he's kind of trying to show the jury that geographically he's kind of closer to them than he is to, I guess, his people or something like that, or his constituents. If we do a little fact check, well, the distance from Marfa to Los Angeles is 995 miles. It's sort of almost due west. And the distance from Marfa to Houston is 599 miles. So it's a nice little thing that he's saying, but it's not true. Strictly speaking, Marfa is about 300 miles closer to Houston. And I don't know whether this is intentional. I would guess that it is, but you never know. But saying something like this is already showing confusion potentially with jurors. So a juror might know either for a fact or might intuitively imagine that Marfa is closer to Houston than it is to LA. But by Daguerreian saying that it's not like that, they already feel kind of confused, or they are not concentrating as much because they're sort of thinking in a different way, right? And that is the bread and butter of a defense case, is doubt, confusion, not sure about something, and also having an emotional response. At around about 4 minutes, Daguerreian kind of misspeaks, and he talks about how long he's been representing Don. And of course, Robert Durst isn't Don, it's Bob. And this also causes everybody to laugh, and the judge kind of puts his hand over his mouth. He's also laughing. That seemed to be an unintentional slip, but once again, everybody laughs, and it's a kind of a warm and fuzzy moment that quite a few warm and fuzzy moments in a short space of time that is allowing the jury to bond with the defense. After that, Daguerreian mentions when he met Durst for the first time, and suddenly it becomes quite sober, and he looks almost quite tearful, and he talks about how he found Durst in jail in Pennsylvania, and he sort of talks again disparagingly about his client being arrested for shoplifting a chicken sandwich, a Wall Street Journal newspaper, and a Band-Aid. And he sort of looks down, and he looks very sorry for himself, as if this was his poor client has been really abused by the legal system. Of course, when he was arrested for shoplifting, it was while he was on the run after the death, the murder of, or the killing of Morris Black and the dismemberment. So it wasn't as if his client was just innocently walking around. He was a fugitive. And worse than that, he was a fugitive who was shoplifting at the same time. Of course, the way DeGuerin is framing it is his poor innocent client, didn't have any money or whatever it was, and all he took was a sandwich. Poor man. And of course, the prosecution had earlier made a kind of a case that Durst did this habitually. I mean, even as a youngster, he was abusing the food stamp system to kind of cheat the government, and was and I guess is a miserly kind of guy, a guy who doesn't want to part with his money. At about the 5-minute mark of DeGuerin's opening, the camera shifts to Durst, and I was quite surprised to see him looking a little bit disheveled. And what I mean is, he was sort of scribbling down notes, but his face was unshaven. Now, when the prosecution did their opening, Durst appeared kind of, I think he was clean shaven on each of those days. Now when the defense do their opening, now he is not, he's looking a bit scraggly. And you might say, well, is that just coincidence? Has he been up late at night in discussions with them? Probably he has. Have they been spending a lot of time, trying to figure out certain aspects? Have they been discussing what the prosecution knows and the prosecution strategy and all sorts of things? Probably. But make no mistake, a lot of criminal trials are about appearances, about performances, about acting, about displays. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Durst looks a little bit haggard in terms of not shaving. I think that plays into the whole sympathy narrative. It's a guy who is got some medical problems and also some psychological problems. And interestingly, the opening dealt with Asperger's, and it's something that Durst himself said is bullshit on the Jinx. That the whole Asperger's thing is overblown and it's really not relevant. And of course, the defense are going to emphasize this. I often hear it from people in the true crime community. How relevant is Asperger's? What about this syndrome or this disorder? And it absolutely plays into the defense side of things. The defense love things like that because you can dismiss all the odd behavior by sort of locating it, containing it within some kind of syndrome or disorder. God forbid that you actually link someone's odd behavior to a whole lifetime of personality aspects. Someone who is entitled, someone who is rude, someone who mumbles to himself, someone who steals. And it's got nothing to do with Asperger's. It's got to do with who that person is, who his identity is. But that's quite a hard job. It's a hard job getting to know a person. It's an easy job saying, oh, he's got Asperger's, that's why. So the next level of mindfuckery that I thought was pretty nifty, but it's still mindfuckery, was the Dick DeGuerin lifted up a card, and on the one side was the pi symbol, a symbol that he said is used for the prosecution, and on the other side a triangle, which is the symbol for the defense, and is basically showing the two sides of this card to the jury, and ending up showing the triangle to the jury, which is a symbolic way of saying, in a way, take our side, or consider our side. Think of it in another way. If he'd shown the prosecution side of the card to the jury at the end of that little spiel, do you see what I'm getting at? Is trying to, in a way, hypnotize the jury with that little show. And make no mistake, criminal trials are often about magic tricks and pulling rabbits out of hats. Sometimes it is literally recasting reality in a way that is not rational, that doesn't make sense. We've seen it in trials before, like O.J. Simpson case and so on, where reality just doesn't, the courtroom reality doesn't kind of obey the laws of nature. And that is when you have a very skilled defense who recast reality, and the jury just fall for it, right? You may recall in the movie A Few Good Men, where the prosecutor, played by Kevin Bacon, talks about how the defense are going to do a magic trick, and they're going to talk about things like code red, blah, blah, blah. That is the prosecutor trying to counterfeit all these little tricks and techniques by letting you know beforehand what is going to happen. And that both sides are going to kind of do that, if you know what I'm saying. They're going to try and counterfeit the counter move. They're going to let you know in advance what the counter move is. And this is kind of what the prosecution's already done. They've already provided the defense case in terms of the context of their narrative leading up to everything else. At about 6 minutes, Daguerreian kind of gets down to business, and he says, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to show you what the evidence shows and what the evidence doesn't show. And I was kind of tickled by this part of it, because it's a true crime rocket science-ism. It's something that I've written about in virtually every book that I've written, which is the absence of evidence is also evidence. It is typically a sign of a cover-up, a deliberate and purposeful removal of something that is supposed to be there but isn't. So I'll give an example. For example, in the Amanda Knox case, the cell phones are off when the incident happens. But in many other cases, you see cell phone data missing on a particular day. In the Chris Watts case, his mistress, Nicole Kessinger, has deleted a whole host of texts. That is evidence. That's evidence of something. And what is it? It's evidence of an affair. But often where you would expect to see something, that absence of evidence is pointing to something. In the Amanda Knox case, I think they found one fingerprint or something like that, or very, very little evidence of Amanda Knox in her own home. And on the one hand, the defense in that case would say, there was no evidence that Amanda Knox was related to this crime. On the other hand, you could say there's a problem that there was no evidence, given that Amanda Knox lived in that house, right? So that is how you can kind of perform a magic trick with evidence and the lack of. And a little bit later in the opening, I think it was the defense's contention that at Susan Berman's home there was no fingerprints, there's no clues whatsoever linking Durst to Susan Berman, right? So no forensic traces directly linking Durst to Susan Berman's murder. Now the crazy part with that argument is it's literally true, so literally there might not be a fingerprint or something, yet Durst is at the same time acknowledged to have been in LA, right, instead of being on the other side of the country. And at the time of Berman's death, and not only that, he wrote the cadaver note saying, you know, he wrote a note to the police saying there's a cadaver at this address. And it's kind of only been acknowledged recently. You know, for more than a decade, I think he denied it, that he wrote this note, and I don't think he admitted it in the jinx. But subsequently, he's admitted it. He said, okay, I did write the note. And that was the sort of main takeout in the media narrative, that the story from the defense is that Durst was there. He saw Susan Berman's body, panicked, and he fled the scene. And that, of course, is a carbon copy of kind of the version of Morris Black, that he accidentally shot Morris Black, panicked, and fled the scene. But he was innocent. It's kind of a crazy defense, because what they're kind of saying is Durst is a really unlucky guy. He has been in a situation twice where someone died and everyone is going to think it's him or something like that. And so it's as a result of that I tweeted, same defense, different day, same defendant, different dead body. And I've kind of made the same critique of the Madeleine McCann case, where there's this contention of cadaver odor in the apartment 5A, in the rented vehicle, and in the villa, and on the clothing of Kate McCann, right? And what I was kind of saying is, when last did you go on holiday and there were traces of a dead body apparently found not only in the hotel room that you stayed in, but also in the rental car that you used, and then also on the clothing that you were wearing? That happens every day, doesn't it? So I guess the Durst defense team have kind of decided they're going to go with the same strategy that worked for them 17 years ago when Durst was acquitted after testifying that he dismembered his neighbor's body while in a panic. Durst panicked. Durst is an odd dude. You've already heard the prosecutor talking about Durst making certain calls, authorizing certain transactions, covering up his tracks. Someone covering up their tracks in a very careful way isn't someone in a panic. And while I agree that Durst was panicking in the sense that he was worried about his situation, I don't think it was like a mindless panic. I think it was mindful anxiety. So in other words, it's not quite as, there's a bit of a subtlety in the way that the defense are framing it. And they're giving him a heck of a lot of leeway by doing that. The thing is, Durst is quite a cool character to associate with the idea of panicking. He kind of looks like a guy who gets himself into really bad situations and then tries to get himself out of them. The question is he panicking, or is he the son of a powerful organization with lots of money that is capable of thinking in a fairly cool, calculated and clinical and also murderous way. Which Robert Durst are we talking about? Now I'm going to take you through some of the headlines that followed trial day 4. First of all, Fox News. Robert Durst admits to writing anonymous letter to police, finding body of slain best friend, but didn't kill her, attorney says. This is news. It is news that it's not news that he said he wrote the letter, but the fact that he said he found her body now is an admission that he was in town and, that he saw her body. What was also news, and this was reported in the Daily Beast, Robert Durst will testify in the murder trial that he panicked when he found the friend's body. Los Angeles Times, Robert Durst's defense, he found his friend's dead body and fled in a panic. Los Angeles Times made quite a good point, just highlighting that Robert Durst has run away all his life. Yes, he has, but for certain reasons that had a lot to do with Robert Durst, didn't they? So of all the coverage that I came across, I really liked Matt Hamilton, a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. I really liked his coverage of day 4. And Hamilton mentions really exactly what is happening in this opening statement by the defense, is that, and I quote, he said, DeGuerin focused much of his time Tuesday morning chipping away at the prosecution's efforts to link Durst to 3 killings. That's exactly what he's doing. He's making small little chips here and there, which are going to add up to distorting the sculpture that the prosecution have made, right? I also like the way that Hamilton highlighted what Daguerreian told the jurors about these 3 buckets. And he drew 3 buckets on a board. He labeled each one Kathy Durst, one for Susan Berman, one for Morris Black. And then he said, and I quote, "The Morris Black bucket is full, and it's full of bad stuff, bad evidence. And our concern is that the evidence about Morris Black will spill over into those other buckets." And then it goes on to talk about how Durst was portrayed as infirm, ill, an autistic person, an oddball, an unusual person. And so within this context of Durst's illness and his victimhood, he's got all these medical problems. He's got esophageal cancer, he's got spinal damage, he's had brain surgery, he's struggling to walk and maintain his balance. Poor Robert Durst. He's going to turn 77 next month. Has difficulty in social situations, and as a result of all of that, he smokes marijuana and drinks alcohol and takes other drugs. That's a very clever way of couching all of that substance abuse in the fact that, he's got medical problems. Hello, did he have these medical problems 20 years ago or even 30 years ago? Did he have esophageal cancer 30 years ago or 40 years ago? Did he have spinal problems or brain surgery 20 years earlier, or difficulty walking and balance? So this is quite a clever mindfuckery from the defense, talking about this use of drugs and substances to take away the pain. And again, he's trying to humanize Durst and almost, associate Durst's problems with everyone else's. Don't we all have social difficulties? Don't we all have medical problems? Don't we all sometimes drink alcohol or try and use some substance to minimize or to soothe that? Right? And the answer is yes, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Durst has other problems as well. He's accused of murdering 3 people. And he was angry because he was cut out of his family fortune and his family inheritance or whatever. And his anger was a response to that. But why was he cut out from all of that to begin with? Well, because he was smoking marijuana as a student and he never stopped. There's marijuana in the fridge when he murders or when he kills Morris Black. So the absence of certain amounts of reasoning in the defense case doesn't mean it's very well reasoned. It means it's leading people down a certain psychological path, which ultimately amounts to what I call the sympathy narrative. And that's something I want you to look out for. I want you to look out for all the little clues when DeGuerin is talking and also his co-counsel. I want you to look out for those little cues where he is putting in another little chip saying, feel sorry for my client. And he's going to do this in facial gestures, in size, in lots of different ways. And the result of that is that he wants you to feel sorry for Robert Durst, right? The headline in Reuters was, Robert Durst will testify at his murder trial, defense lawyer says. The New York Times has kind of some interesting coverage as well, just talking about the irony of where the defense team are staying, that they're staying in the same hotel where Durst met with Andrew Jarecki and agreed to give 20 hours of interviews and access to 60 cartons of his personal papers. It is a really weird irony that the defense team are staying at the same hotel where Durst effectively shot himself in the foot. BuzzFeed and the New York Post both talk about Robert Durst will take a stand at his California murder trial. Even Bloomberg have said the same thing. Robert Durst will testify at murder trial, lawyer tells jury. Okay, I'm not going to take it further than that. I will be probably following this. I'll be back tomorrow with further analysis of day 5. So please subscribe to this channel, ring the bell for notifications, like, leave a comment, share amongst your networks. And there is also additional analysis on Patreon if you're interested. Thank you for listening.
When Bob showed up and found her dead, he panicked. He wrote the anonymous letter so her body would be found, and he ran.